Hello there, I'm Luke Murray.
Thomas Organ.
Christian Schlitt.
And Dick Eliot.
And we're here in West Allis doing an oral history of Dick Eliot.
Perfect. I'm the interviewer, we're the interviewers, Luke is the cameraman.
Well, hello this afternoon. It's, what is it, the 15th? Is it the 14th today?
Today's the 14th, yeah.
14th of May. 2025. And I have the privilege of having these young fellows here from Marquette. I'm going to talk about my career that I've been blessed to have, and I wish the same for you fellows as well. When I was growing up in the 40s, we didn't have refrigerators. We had ice boxes. And the big thing was to follow the ice trucks up the street and get a big chunk of ice, and, on a hot summer day. We had skating rinks where we'd go skating, roller skating, ice skating, ponds. And of course the polio epidemic hit, unfortunately, and we all got polio shots, and I had a buddy of mine that got the polio, unfortunately, but he turned out okay. And we played a lot of baseball and bowling alleys. We didn't have TV then, we had radio. And I used to set pins up the street from where we lived at a place called Silver City. And I think we got a quarter a game, and a big bottle of soda, and we'd be back there with the bowling balls coming and the pins flying all over the place. And big bands at that time were on all the different ballrooms. We had a couple big ballrooms in town. And the big bands of that day, once the ballrooms closed, it was all over with, and a lot of musicians went to Las Vegas or New York or California. And then, of course, we had World War II, which I remember. I remember when it began, and I remember when the bomb dropped, when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And I think that was 1945. And I got to go to Japan. I was on a world tour with Andy Williams in 1973. And we went to Hiroshima, and I stood on the spot where the bomb dropped, and they had a little temple there, and I said a prayer for the dear souls that died, and they had a hospital there where children are still being born mutated. It's really, really a shock. Then, of course, we all had to register for the draft when we were 18. The Korean War was happening, and I took a job, thanks to my uncle, had the foresight. It said, take an apprenticeship and you will be deferred from the draft, because we had plants here in Milwaukee that were defense plants. So I chose Falk because they had a good baseball team, but I didn't make the team. It was like a semi-pro team. But I served 4 years in apprenticeship, and I saw these guys running the machines. He said, yeah, I've been running that machine for 4 years, and see these guys with missing fingers, and oh my gosh, it was... So anyway, I served the apprenticeship, served 4 years, and I'm a machinist journeyman by trade. And after my 4 years, they offered me third shift running a Gishel, which was a turret lathe. And third shift was from 11 at night till 7 in the morning, which I couldn't do. So I quit the job, and my folks were very upset about it, but I saved enough money, and I thought I'd go to college and be a music teacher. And I was short algebra credits, so I took a correspondence course, and piano player I was working with helped me with the problems. On December 7th, 1959, I got accepted into the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And the same day I got my draft notice. I thought it was the end of the world. But it wasn't. I wound up in one of the best bands in the military, which I'll talk about later. But that time, we all wore draped slacks, with the big chain coming down, and baggy shirts and field jackets from World War II. Grade school, I went to Derfler. I think I gave you that information the other day. And our family was involved in music. My father had a tavern, and we played music every night. And my brother and I and my dad, and the other kids were out playing. And we were playing music, but it was a good thing. And on weekends, Dad had playing jobs, and we got to play with the other kids. Let's see. I was fond of Dixieland music, Louis Armstrong and those kind of people, and then I got interested in jazz by hearing a great guitarist by the name of Django Reinhardt at the time. He was a Belgian gypsy, and he had only 2 fingers, as the other 2 were burned in a fire. And he became one of the most famous worldwide, changed the jazz scene at that time, and started the gypsy jazz movement, which is still alive today. And then, of course, I got into bebop and jazz and heard Barney Kessel and other guitar players, Johnny Smith, who I had the pleasure to study with later on in my career. And let's see, the racial strife in the 60s. That was terrible. And when I got into the military, our colonel, Azzolino, would let the black musicians stay on base in Colorado Springs if we went to Texas or Florida. But prior to that, I went on a trip with my brother and one of my friends that was serving an apprenticeship with me. I think it was 1957. We drove down to Florida in the wintertime to see the Braves at that time, at spring training, you know. And driving through the South, it was terrible. I saw the segregated toilets and you know, water fountains for whites only. It was terrible. I mean, it was really a shock. And I hope things will get better one day. We all had suede shoes, along with the tricks. And let's see, World War II, Korea. And of course, I was in the military for the Vietnam era. And fortunately, I didn't have to go overseas. Out of 440 fellows in my battalion, only 2 of us stayed stateside. One fellow was an engineer from Chicago, and I never told him I was a machinist. I told him I was a musician. And I was able to take some tests and wound up getting into the service band, and I didn't have to go to Vietnam. But our duty with the North American Air Defense Band, which you'll see some pictures of later, was either in New York or Hollywood, recording military broadcasting for overseas troops and so forth. Okay, amplifiers and guitars. We had 2 bands in those days. And yeah, I guess let's see something from the movie. Well, we went to the movies for 50 cents. We'd get in, and my folks would give us $1 a piece. So 50 cents to get in, and then we'd get popcorn and a drink for the other 50. So, and we didn't have the television at that time. It was only radios and some movies, and we had the wristwatches, the wind-up wristwatches that glowed in the dark, you know, Timex. And we had, in those days when I was going to school, we didn't have ballpoint pens. They come out later in the 50s, you know, so we had the fountain pen, you know, with the ink wells and that. So that's a little bit about what I wrote down. So any questions you want to ask me about?
Yeah. So like we said, we're going to try to go in kind of chronological order. That's a great summary.
Okay.
So we're just going to kind of touch on a lot of the things that you said. So like when and where were you born? Kind of where did you grow up? What was the neighborhood like? What was
I
it like
grew
to
up
do
in,
there?
I was born in Milwaukee, and on September of 1936, and we lived on South 38th Street off between National and Pierce, and it was on a hill, and down below were the railroad yards, and we'd hear the railroad cars, you know, coupling, and then when it snowed, after a couple of days, when the snow was all covered with soot from all the railroad. So then I went to Durfler Elementary School. I went to Walker Junior High for my ninth year, and then South Division for my 10th through my senior year. I graduated.
Did a lot of the kids who you went to middle school with, did they live in your neighborhood or near you?
Oh,
or
sorry?
Did a lot of the kids who you went to school with, did they live in your neighborhood?
Yes, they did. And we played baseball under the 35th Street Viaduct, and we could only hit the left field because of the viaduct. One day we hit a ball up on the viaduct, and some fellow came driving down, and he came with the baseball, and he says, "Anybody belong to this?" And he had a big hole in his windshield, but he was giggling, he was laughing about it, you know. Thank God we didn't hurt anybody. So, yeah, we played baseball and went to see the Brewers, the Braves. The Brewers at that time were an American Association team, and they had the stadium way up in the north end of town, and we'd take the streetcar and the buses to get up there. We had streetcars in those days. And State Fair Park. And, okay, next question?
What was there like in your neighborhood besides playing baseball? Were there any like you mentioned the ice trucks is a cool
Well, we
story.
had the bowling alley, you know.
Bowling alley.
Yeah. And the baseball was the main thing. Then we'd go to Jackson Park Mitchell Park, the ice skate. And we played baseball there too. And then we'd go to the different roller rinks and that. Yeah, it was another time. We didn't have supermarkets then. We had the old stores, you know. But go on. Next one.
Did you spend a lot of time with your brother as well?
Yes. We went to the YMCA. And later on Camp Anarchy, the YMCA, we learned how to swim and all that. And then there was a gentleman by the name of Swickawani. Swick was raised on the Teton Sioux reservation. His uncle was an Indian agent, and he was in World War II. Of course, he was a paratrooper, and he was in the final push where they bailed out of the airplane on the gliders. They had wooden gliders, and they would take. And these guys would run across the runway and get on the glider, and they took them up on the gliders, and then they bailed out, and then the gliders, of course, crashed, so the Germans couldn't hear the gliders. And they bailed out at night, and he said the Germans were waiting for him, of course, and they had lights and the shooting, and he hid like a rock, and they walked right past him. But his Indian name was Swickawani. It was Running Wolf. He could run through the woods like lightning. Incredible. This was Reed Arrow. He was a teacher at Camp Anarchy, where I was a counselor, and he taught us when we were shooting at the target, not just shoot to the target, but aim directly for the bullseye in life as well. So I had a lot of friends, and I was with Swick when he trapped these two hawks. We went with a group out into the woods, and the mother hawk had flown out to get food, and he must have psyched it out what her schedule was. And he had these things that they used to climb up telephone poles with, you know, like spikes. And he went up and he got these little kids when they were chicks, put them in a bag, and he raised them. They thought he was his. You know, I thought at the time it was cruel, but that's the way it was, I guess, what the Indians did. Okay, so yeah, we went to roller rinks, we went to the movies, you know, listened to the radio a lot. I had a portable radio that I bought when I was 12 years old, I think. 11 years old. And I was we had double bunks, my brother and I would station surf at night, and I get this station that said, I heard about a flying saucer crashed in Roswell, Arizona, and they got 3 aliens, 1 lived. And so the next day, we're listening on the radio, and then they said it was a weather balloon, which was not true. The fellow that did the interview was holding the weather balloon before he died, Colonel Marcel, Major Marcel. He said later that he had to do it, that it really did, they really did get the UFO that crashed, and one of the aliens lived. And the colonel that was in charge of it, Colonel Corso, he was an adjutant to General Trudeau, And he wound up with all the artifacts and the bodies. He had to go to the cemetery, not the cemetery, but one of those places where you get caskets. He had to get children's caskets for the two. And he hung on to all the artifacts for 20 years, and then he funneled it out to Westinghouse, General Electric. He had to wait for our technology to catch up to what he had. Printed circuits, night vision, microwave ovens, all those things were on that ship. So all my life I've been interested in UFOs. I've seen a couple, but I remember that night and hearing that story, and then it was one of the biggest cover-ups in history besides the Kennedy assassination and the Martin Luther King assassinations. A lot of things they're not telling us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Next question.
You also mentioned like the polio epidemic. That's that's a massive.
It was terrible. One of my buddies across the street, his older brother, which was my brother's age, got polio, and we all got the shots. It was a terrible epidemic, unfortunately. We got the measles and shots and all that.
Would you say that compares to like the COVID pandemic that just happened?
Well, polio was infantile paralysis, where the kids got, they couldn't walk, and fortunately my buddy Roy went on to play baseball, and he overcame it, but it was a terrible time. Yeah, the COVID's another story.
You talked a little bit about the Brewers and the Braves. How important to people in general around your neighborhood was pro sports? Like today, you see a lot of people care a lot about the Bucks and the Brewers still.
Yeah.
Was it similar like that, or do you think?
Well, I remember seeing Jackie Robinson play. He was the first black player, and then Don Newcomb was a great pitcher for the Dodgers, and I got to meet him one time in an airport. Great big guy, and it was another time. It was a horrible time. And then, of course, was it Walter Olson that brought him in for the Dodgers? He told the white players, he says, there's a lot more coming, and they're hungry and they want to play. And when we see the great black athletes today in all the sports, and they're incredible. They have a lot of skills that, I'm not saying that the white players don't have it, but look, they got black athletic skills that are remarkable.
Cool. Then you brought up bowling a couple of times that you worked there. Do you remember like your wage when you were working there? What you were doing with that the bowling alley? Bowling alley?
Oh, in the bowling alley.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father's friend owned the Silver City, which is still there, 38th and National, and the bowling alley, of course. And they let us set pins, We'd walk down there. It was terrible, the noise, but we get a big bottle of soda, and we throw the pins in and then jump back up on. They had a little ledge there where you could sit on, and sometimes the bowling pins got splattered and was shattered, I should say.
Yeah. Do you remember what you got paid when you were working there?
Pardon me?
Do you remember what you got paid?
Yeah, we got paid $0.25 a line.
Nice.
It was big bucks.
Yeah. Very cool.
I was 12, 13, 14,
How expensive was it to get a ticket to the Braves game if you wanted to go to the game? Was it comparable to a movie or?
Well, I can't recall. The Brewers, they were an American Association team. We had the Minnesota had a team, the Kansas City Blues, Toledo Mud Hens, and a lot and Henry Aaron. I got to see Henry Aaron come up. They brought him up when the Braves came to Milwaukee. Bobby Thompson was center fielder, and he broke his ankle sliding into second base. So here was Henry Aaron. But before that, we saw him when he was just 19 years old, playing in the American Association, and he played he batted cross wrist like this. And Charlie Grimm had got him to bat like this. But I saw him as a 19-year-old kid, playing in the American Association. And of course, when he came up to the Brewers, he went on to be the Braves, I should say. And then he stayed with the Braves for a number of years, and then he went to Atlanta. Yeah, he was remarkable.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then moving on kind of a little bit later in your life, you said you went to South Division.
Yes.
You played baseball. obviously you play instruments. Kind of, what was that like, high school at that
Well,
time?
I played in the orchestra. I wanted to play trumpet. My father said, no, string players last longer. Going to take string bass. So in junior high, I took string bass, and I was so short they put me on a box so I could reach the strings, you know. Then I played in high school. I played in the orchestra, bass, and then I played in all city orchestra, of course. And when I got in the military, when I got drafted, we went to Fort Leonard Wood. I got drafted December 7, 1960. 1959. 1960, I report for duty on the 3rd of January, and we go to Fort Leonard Wood, and it's winter time. Terrible. Guys' fingers were freezing to the triggers, and they couldn't shoot with gloves on, you know. So I found the band building, and I said, I want to take a test for the band. He says, your outfit's going down to Texas next week. Oh, so he says, when you get down there, find the band building. So I was so thankful. We got down to Fort Hood, Texas, which is near Austin, and it was January, and it was warm down there and everything. Found the band building, and a black sergeant interviewed me, and he said, what do you play? I said, I play bass. And he brought out a bass fiddle, and I played some bass for him with the bow and then read some music, and he said, do you play anything else? And I said, well, I play guitar. And he brought out a silver tone, that's a Sears and Roebuck guitar, and some dance band music. And I read them down. I was 24 years old, and I had experience playing television and big bands, you know. And so I read that down. He says, do you play some jazz? And I played All the Things You Are and improvised on it. And he says, you're in the band. He says, you're going to have to go to band training school to learn how to play tuba, because there's no job number for string bass. And so my job number was 057, tuba. So I thought, okay, I got to go back to Fort Leonard Wood for another 14 weeks after 3 months of basic training, learn how to play tuba. But it's better than going to Korea, to Vietnam. So I get home on leave, and my mother said, there's a letter here from the War Department. And I opened the letter. This was after basic training. I opened the letter up, and it says, disregard orders and proceed to Colorado Springs to the North American Air Defense Band, job number 021. I called the draft board. I said, I got this letter that I have to go to Colorado Springs. What's 021? The NORAD band, North American Air Defense. At that time, the Cold War was happening, and the headquarters command was in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. So they had this big band that was starting. Colonel Lazarine was forming a 75-piece concert band, which you'll see a picture of in a minute, and the jazz band, dance band, 18-piece, and he needed a guitar player, and he couldn't find one. He was at the Pentagon, and he had a friend there, and said he was getting players off of name bands that were getting drafted, trombone, trumpet players and that, and he needed a guitar player, and this colonel said to him, he says, there's none in the service except this card that came across my desk last week, and somebody crossed out piano and wrote down guitar and gave this guy a 98. And he says, that's who we want. So that's how I got it. So what happened is that sergeant gave me that wonderful grade, and he thought I was going to come back to Fort Leonard Wood to play tuba, you know, and play jazz on, guitar. But I got chosen for this band. And so when I called the draft board, it said it's trumpet 021 instead of tuba 057. So on my discharge it says trumpet cornet, which I never played, and so that's how I got into the band, as a trumpet player. And and then I played cymbals and bass drum in the marching band and in the percussion section. But my main job was playing guitar in the dance band. So now I get to Colorado Springs, and it's a beautiful place. I hope you get to go there one day. And we get to the base, and this fellow that I showed you, the trombone player from Woody Herman's band, Phil Wilson, and I got there the same day. And we check into the band building, and they said there's no place for the Army. The Army didn't get here yet. So the NORAD band was made up of all the services: Army, Air Force, Navy, Royal Canadians, all the services that made up the North American continent that defended us. So now the headquarter command being in Colorado Springs, Colonel Azzolina got the funds to form the North American Air Defense Band, the NORAD band. So we got there and they said the Army elements coming up from Fort Benning, Georgia didn't get here yet, so you fellows just gonna have to go out and get an apartment and we'll give you the per diem for it. So we went out and got an apartment. And while I was in Colorado Springs, I had heard a great guitarist when I was growing up by the name of Johnny Smith, who was probably one of the greats of all time. And I knew he was living someplace in Colorado Springs or Denver, and found out that he was in Colorado Springs. And I would go to see him every night at a club called Eddie's. It was a little bar upstairs with a dance floor on Main Street. And I went go every night. And I finally worked up enough courage to ask him if I could study with him. And he says, I don't teach anymore, but he says, come to the house. And I told him I was in the Army band, in the NORAD band. So he took me on as a student and gave me a 20-year leave. Never charged me a dime. It's a great Johnny Smith. You might want to Google him sometime. He was one of the greats of all time, which we can talk about another time. So finally the Army band shows up from Fort Benning, Georgia, and we got 75-piece band rehearsal every day. And then that was in the morning. In the afternoon, we do the dance band, which is the 18-piece jazz band. So here I am in the concert band, and I was up in the percussion section, and I had the cymbals, and I learned how to count measures. You know, some of these I had like 40 measures out, and count 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 46, 2, 47, 2, 40, and get my cymbal crash, you know. And then the marching band, of course. So then in the afternoon, after rehearsals, the colonel said, right now we had 3 arrangers, and says, well, you go in the copy room and you can become one of the copyists. My copying was terrible. And so Colonel said, well, just go in the room and practice your guitar all afternoon. So what I did, and I was studying with Johnny at the time. And so our duty, we were gone every 2 weeks. We were all over the country. We doing concerts, etc. And we were either in New York or Hollywood, as I said, doing military broadcasting. And I got the studio to play in TV studios and recording studios, and I had that experience. You know, I was 24 years old and on top of the world. We flew on a lot of different aircraft. Some were good, some weren't so good. The C-119s were the ones with the back where they opened up and they drove jeeps in. All those, we flew on a lot of those, and we had to wear chest chutes, parachutes, you know. And when Colonel Azzolina heard my wife at that time, who recently passed away a few years ago, she was a great singer, a really great. She was better than some of the stars I played with in Vegas. Eliot was her name. He heard her, and he was just amazed at her ability. And we had a girl singer that was in the Air Force, and he let her go, and he would use Lynn on our different jobs. We would pay, when we were in Albuquerque, we went to Great Falls, Montana. She was on the plane with us as Airman First Class Lynn Eliot. She had to wear a parachute. She wasn't even in the service, you know. So, and then we did a live performance from Albuquerque, New Mexico at Sandia Air Base, 1961, I think it was, New Year's Eve, or was it 62, a live 30-minute broadcast. I don't know if I ever played that for you. So, and she was on there with us, and quite some wonderful times. So that was our duty in the service, and after 2 years and a half, I was extended for another 4 months because of the Berlin crisis. So in April of 1962, I was discharged. They asked me if I wanted to stay on, and I said no, and I missed the World's Fair in Seattle. They had just built that Space Needle. But I wanted to get out of the service, and so I got back to Milwaukee, and I went down to a place called the Tunnel Inn, which is now the Safe House. This was an alley. Tunnel Inn was here, which is now the Safe House. Pabst Theater over here, and down the alley was the Elbow Room. So Skip Wagner had a 5-piece jazz band there, and when I got out, I went came down with my brother to see him, and I sat in, and they offered me the job, playing 5-6 nights a week. So we either played there or down the elbow room when another group came in. And we bounced around town, different places. We played at a place called Gallagher's. And there was another jazz club next door, Kuro's, which brought in people like Dizzy Gillespie and Sarah Vaughan and that. And there was another club on the other side of, let's see, Wells and Highland. It was Gallagher's, and it was called the Brass Key, between Wells and Wisconsin Avenue on 3rd. And it was a strip joint. And then it later became a jazz club, and they had this long stage. And bands would come, like Lionel Hampton's band, George Shearing. We would all go and watch, hear the great players that came through. But also, we would go to the big ballrooms and see the great bands, Les Brown and Stan Kenton, and just sit there in awe and see these wonderful players. And watching guitar players, Never thought I'd accomplish what I accomplished. There was a ballroom on Mitchell Street around the corner from South Division. And I went to a dance there, and there was a guitar player, and I was 16, 17. I said, gee whiz, if I could just only be almost as good as that guy. And I wound up being, going on with a wonderful career. Thanks to the Lord. In basic training, I prayed a lot. I didn't want to go overseas and shoot anybody, and the Lord answered my prayers in my profession. And every night going to every job and every performance, I said my prayers before I went in. And the Lord sent me this wonderful young man, Luke Murray, who's going to have a wonderful career. I know the Lord has something special for him. So I've been blessed in my career playing and teaching as well, and to meet you fellas and have the opportunity to document my so-called career.
Has faith always been important in your life? Was it important for your family growing up? And then throughout high school, was faith important to you?
One more time?
Was faith always important to you, growing up?
Yeah. My mother taught me the Lord's Prayer when I was a boy. And I asked about dying, what happened when we died. I said, we'll all be together. And I was just a kid, I wasn't even in school yet. And I always remember that. Mother taught me the Lord's Prayer, faith. And I had that instilled in me. And I saw a lot of things in my lifetime, and I've been around the world. I've seen a lot of poverty, a lot of suffering, heartbreak, I was blessed at Caesar's Palace. When Caesar's Palace opened, I was chosen as it was the premier band at the time, 1965. And they had a showroom and they had a lounge. And sometimes we were fortunate to play an 8 o'clock show and a midnight show, and then go to the lounge and do a 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock show and get 2 paychecks. Well, I'm in the showroom, and the contractor come up to me and said, the Fifth Dimension's in the lounge, and they didn't like the guitar player, and he was the #1 guitar player in town. So the Fifth Dimension had hits like Up, Up and Away and Aquarius. It's the time of Aquarius. So I went down in between shows and met the conductor in the hallway, and he went over the book with me, and went in and played the show, and they loved me, and the bass player was Jerry Sheff, who's on that Barney Kessel recording where he's playing upright. And Jerry went on later to be Elvis's bass player, and you'll see him, Jerry Sheff, one of the greats. And the drummer, I can't remember his name, but he went to Canada and became a very, very famous drummer there. So we all became friends at that time, and I bonded with the Fifth Dimension, and later traveled with Marilyn McCoo after she left the Fifth Dimension, after the Fifth Dimension disbanded. So that was another time, and then also, besides working in the lounge, the showroom in the lounge at Caesar's Palace, sometimes I'd be playing the showroom at Caesar's Palace, and I'd get a call to play a lounge at someplace, the Frontier or another hotel, and I'd jump in a cab and get to that hotel and do the 10 o'clock show, get through it, at quarter to, do the 10 o'clock show, get through at 10:30, at 11:30, get back in a cab, get back to Caesar's Palace to play the midnight show, jump back in a cab to do the 2 o'clock show. So I did that a lot, and there was a lot of doubling going on, made a lot of money, and recordings. I did a lot of recordings with Fats Domino, and a recording with Louis Armstrong. It was going to be a Christmas album. And finished the midnight show, which is 1:30 in the morning. We get to the studio about 2:15 a.m. And we're all set up, and Louis and the boys come in, and we do the first take. It was a Christmas album for Columbia. And after the first take, a fellow in the sound booth on the mic says, "Say, Louis, on this next take, would you?" And Louis loses his cool. You know, he didn't want to be told how are you going to tell Louis Armstrong how to play. Well, you blankety, 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 blank. Come on, boys, let's go home. Packed up and we left. We got paid for the session, but never got paid. We never recorded anything. Aretha Franklin was at the International, and I had just married my second wife, and we was just going on my honeymoon, and the contract comes and says, Aretha's going to do an album, and some of her players can't read. I mean, it was a recording, they were great players, but under the mic, they weren't studio players. So they augmented the band with a lead trumpet player, a lead trombone player, a lead sax player, and I had to go in and play guitar next to her guitar player. And there was a lot of friction. They didn't like the white players coming in, and of course it was, and unfortunately the first session was a disaster, and we never produced the album. So those were some of the stories. And I felt bad for Aretha, and of course the guitar player I had to work with. But those were the times. It was a lot of work. I thought hotels were going up all over. I thought, my God, we'll never be out of work. And of course that changed. When I first got to Vegas, we all went to the Musicians Union and signed in, and we had to wait 6 months before we could get a card. They had a waiting period. So I was teaching at a place called Ted Vesley Music. God bless Ted. He was a great trombone player with Jimmy Dorsey's band. Or was it Tommy Dorsey? We had a music store, and I got a job teaching there, and he advanced me $75 a week, and then finally I filled my studio up. And so one day somebody came in, and Ted came back to my studio and said, "Hey Dick, there's a country guy out here that's forming a country band, and he needs a lead guitar player and a drummer." So the three of us that came out was from Milwaukee to Vegas was my trumpet player, my drummer friend, and a bartender who wanted to come with us. So that's another story. So he says, "Take the job. It's 5 nights a week, 6 nights a week with a radio show." And so it was in a place called Nashville, Nevada. And they brought in people like Roy Clark and, I can't remember all the named country bands at that time. And we were the backup band. So here I was playing country music. But that experience helped me as the music business changed on the Strip. It became country music, started integrating with the pop music of that time. And then when I left there, I got to the Riviera. I was endorsing a guitar that was made by Echo Guitars, EKO. And the LaDuca brothers were here in Milwaukee. They were accordion makers, and they started making guitars in Italy, and they needed an artist, and so I was their artist. So I got a call from Johnny Desmond, who was a singer, great singer at that time, was coming into the Riviera, and he needed a guitar player. And so I called the union, and I got permission from the union because I was requested by a star. So I got, after 3 months, I got my union card. So I'm playing at the Riviera with Johnny Desmond, which is another story. So between shows, between different gigs, getting a job here and a job there, thanks to Nick Esposito, great guitar player that opened some doors for me in Vegas. I worked different places like the Whiskey A Go-Go with rock and roll bands. And one of the fellows I played was with Lee Greenwood, who wrote God Bless the New USA. And he played saxophone. And we had the go-go dancers and all those rock tunes. And we played at the El Cortez from midnight from 10 to 4 in the morning. That was 6-hour gigs if you didn't work in the showrooms. And then I took a job working on the west side in Las Vegas at a jazz club that was owned by the alderman at that time. I can't remember the name of it. And we played from midnight till 6 in the morning. And it was myself and the white drummer and this black organ player, Paul Bryant, who was the organ player for Howard Roberts. And it was quite an experience. They were all very good to us, you know. We were only 2 white guys in the place, you know, and we're over in the black section of town, which nobody went to at that time. White people didn't go. And by the way, in Vegas at that time, when I got there in '63, black people and performers had to stay on the west side. And Nat King Cole and then Sammy Davis came, and Sinatra was at the Sands, and he said, I won't perform unless Sammy can stay at the hotel. So when he went in the pool, nobody was at the pool. You know, segregation was horrible. And people walking up and down the strip from the Sahara to the Riviera was about a half a mile. And you'd see black people walking and they'd get arrested. They didn't want black people on the... Then I got to play at the Desert Inn. And I played for Jimmy Webb. Jimmy Webb wrote all those songs, Up, Up and Away. And he was a teenage genius songwriter. And Connie Stevens was his opening act. Oh, he was the opening act for Connie, and I was playing for Connie. So I had to play him as well. And his guitar player and bass player had long hair. And between shows, they walked from the Desert Inn across the street to the New Frontier, and they got arrested because they didn't want hippies or anybody looking like, you know, that kind of element on the strip. Then I worked with the Smothers Brothers, who were great friends. They were like you guys, like the kids next door. And there was a district attorney at that time, which was against Hell's Angels, any of these guys coming up from L.A. on motorcycles. So Tommy and Dickie and their friends came up on motorcycles with motorcycle jackets, and they drove in the Vegas. And at that, you know, Las Vegas, the city of Las Vegas, and the county are 2 different things. Las Vegas had their own police force, and the county had their own police force. And each hotel had security guards, which were animals. And I told my kids, my sons, like in their age, you're in the hotels, don't argue with the security guards. I mean, I see these guys beat somebody to inch it. Don't print this. I saw guys get beat up and handcuffed, and I mean, it was terrible. And they didn't have to answer to anybody because they were a police force unto themselves in the hotels. But the Smothers Brothers became great friends, and Tommy just passed away. But they were really great.
Cool. Going off of kind of your music career as well, you said you did a world tour and ended up in like Hiroshima.
Well, I was blessed to travel with. I worked at the Riviera. No, I got 5 calls in 1 week, 3 different hotels. And one was for the Riviera. It was from Dick Palumbi, who I had worked with at Gallagher's. And he had remembered me, and he had moved to Las Vegas, and he got the band at the Riviera. And I think it was 4 other calls from 4 other hotels. And I went with Dick, and I stayed with Dick for 24 years at the Riviera. And Dick would let me go out with these different stars. And he let me send in a sub, and I traveled with Andy Williams, and we went to Japan, went to the Philippines, went to Australia, and that answered your question about traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in 1979, I got a call to go with Sammy Davis Jr., which was incredible. I think I sent you the picture today. And we went to Japan, we went to the Philippines, we went to Australia, went to Singapore, we went to New Zealand, we went to Singapore, Hong Kong, and oh my goodness gracious. And with Sammy, we opened up the the Opera House, you know, that thing that looks like a big old eggshell, you know. And one of the performances, Sammy put the mic down on the stage, and I accompanied him on a song called "If I Loved You Time and Again I Would." So that was a song I accompanied him with. And he put the mic on the floor, on the stage, and he says, "Let's see how the acoustics are." So we did it without the microphone, and the place came apart. Australian audiences, very demonstrative. Like when we were kids, when we go to the show, and a cartoon would come on, everybody stamped their feet. It was like that, you know, like nothing you ever saw. And with Andy, when we worked in Australia, we played Brisbane. We played Brisbane, Sydney, Adelaide, and Perth. Perth is way out on the out, like San Francisco, where LA is from New York. Australia is about the size of the United States. Got Sydney here, Brisbane, Melbourne, and way over, and Adelaide, and then way over here on the west coast is Perth. Well, we go to Brisbane, and we go into this theater, and the stage is pitched like this. Not like this, so the people in the audience can, you know. So we're sitting in our chairs. Well, so we had a lot of wonderful experiences. Adelaide, I got to go to kangaroo farm, and I sent you a picture of me holding a koala bear, and we saw these kangaroos bouncing all over the place. Oh, so anyway, next question.
How did those foreign cities that you went to compare to Milwaukee and Milwaukee music culture? You said,
One more time?
how were the cities that you went to on that world trip? How did they compare to Milwaukee?
Around the world, you mean?
Yeah.
Tokyo was wonderful. Very, very not demonstrative. They don't clap a lot, you know. And I had a friend of mine that was a road manager for the Sandler and Young. They were two singers that came to Vegas, and his wife was from Japan. She was a big star there. And I said, I'm going to Japan with Andy Williams. He says, oh, you got to study Japanese with Masayo between shows. So I think it was 5 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks, I studied Japanese with Masayo between shows. And I got to Japan, and she had hooked me up with some of her friends there, and her relation that took me shopping for and all the guys for shopping for cameras and watches and all that, you know. But it was another culture, very, very polite, you know. Everywhere you go, you bow, you know, and you get in an elevator, and you're a head taller like you are, you know, short people, you know. So it was a wonderful experience, and we were in 18 cities. 18 cities, oh my gosh, it was a great time. And the audiences, we got to got to Philippines. It was a very police state. The hotel had security guards on every floor, and if you brought a guest in, they wanted to know the name and everything. And Marcos at that time was the dictator of the Philippines. And we got to play a performance for him and his family, and he gave us a gold coin and a box of cigars, which I didn't smoke, hung on for years. They were sealed. And I gave them to a friend years later, and he said, my God, he said, I never smoked anything like these. But he took millions from those people. And then later his son became prime minister, and he gave most of the money back, wherever it was. So, and then New Zealand was like going in a time machine from Australia. And they sent all the old cars, Mercedes, you know, limousines, they'd send to New Zealand. And New Zealand was like going 20 years back in time. It was just incredible. Let's see, what else? Singapore, Hong Kong. Singapore was the shopping center of the world. We were in this is with Sammy Davis Jr., of course, and we had great hotels. And in the hotel we were in always great hotels. And they had a whole wall where you could get anything you wanted. You push a button if you wanted champagne, or if you wanted a sandwich, or you wanted, you know, it was all. and the bathrooms were incredible, the views were incredible. And we go out of the hotel, and one of the black roadies, he says, "Don't go." I said, "Why?" He says, "It's dangerous out there." I said, "Why?" He says, "All the prices are cheaper than they were in Hong Kong or Japan. So you can get anything you wanted, suits, watches, anything, you know, ridiculous prices." So it was just an incredible time. Next question.
Yeah. So like after your world tour and your time in Vegas, obviously you came back to Milwaukee. What brought you back here, and what was it like?
In 1994, they breached our contract at the Riviera. And at that time, there were only 2 working bands, live bands. Everything had gone to tape music. It was the Stardust and the Riviera. And during the strikes, they would keep the Riviera open, and everybody else would have to go out and walk the picket lines. The electricians, the stagehands, I forget the other trade unions, the culinary. So the hotels got wise, and they started negotiating separately with each union, so we didn't have that solidarity anymore. So in '94, they breached our contract at the Riviera, and it was like when the gold mines, the silver mines dried up in Nevada, you know, there was no work. I waited around a year, and there was nothing. I worked a few jobs, and I came back at the winter of '95 to see my mother, and I hooked up with Skip Wagner. He says, "Listen, I fired my trumpet player. Would you like to come up to Three Lakes, Wisconsin for the summer of '96? $100 a week and room and board at Three Lakes, Wisconsin." And he says, "You can play the trumpet book on guitar," which I did. He had a 5-piece band up there. So I spent the summer up in Three Lakes, and the saxophone player and I, Peter Funk, who has the same birthday as me, our mothers had become friends. And he said, "Your mother was hoping that you'd stay with her, you know." So I had no place to go, you know. The job finished at the end of September, from June to September. I came back to Milwaukee, and I went down to the Tunnel Inn, and Skip was playing there, and I got hired with Skip. And stayed in Milwaukee for 18 months, taking care of my mom, and then the trumpet player decided, he says, "Hey, let's go to Vegas, you know, there's opportunities there." So we left for Vegas on November 22nd, 1963, the day Kennedy got assassinated. So we had that on our minds, you know, we got to Vegas, and I had the teaching job at Ted Vesley's, and then through Nick Esposito, I got some playing jobs, working in the major hotels, and that country gig I told you about.
You had mentioned segregation a little bit a while back. Was it as bad in Milwaukee as it was in Las Vegas?
Well, yeah, unfortunately. And it's a sad thing. I was working with the Fifth Dimension, and one of my brother-in-laws came from Milwaukee to stay with me, and he said to me, what's a white guy? What are you working with the N-word?" And I got angry with him, and I said, "Don't ever use that word in my house, you know. I raise my children." I said, "Nobody's got a choice of what color they are, you know. Nobody asks you what color you want it to be." It was like Walter Alston was the Dodgers manager. He says, "I don't want any of this racial thing going on." He says, "We're all one color." He says, "But I want the light guys over here and the dark guys over here." It's a joke. But segregation was terrible. And unfortunately, some of the people, one of my friends I grew up with, you know, I have to correct him when he uses the N-word, you know. And it was not good. With Sammy Davis now, we're in Sydney, and then we went to Melbourne. And we're in Melbourne, and we're in this big mansion, old ornate millionaire's home, you know, and I'm out on the balcony having a glass of champagne, and a fella came out to me And he asked the same question. He says, what's a white man working with? A bunch of, and I said, where? Who? So when we traveled with Sammy, we always had different seatmates on the planes. So one day I get on the plane, and my seatmate is Sammy Davis, is a valet who did his hair, did his clothes and all that. And the first thing out of his mouth was, I hate white people. And I said, yeah, I do too. He was shocked. He wasn't ready for that. Reversing the intimidation. In life, you're going to have people that are going to come up with things. You just put it back on them, whatever the situation. I hope it's not racial, So that was some of the situations I had to deal with. Growing up, I had some black friends. One of them was Panty Ellis, who's still alive. He's in his 90s. He's one of the great guitar players here in Milwaukee and taught at the conservatory. And we never, at that time, we could go up on the north side and go into black clubs. And I remember in Chicago going to black clubs, and everything changed. Everything changed. In New York, when I was in the NORAD band, and I used to get there to record in the 60s, we'd go up, if you had your guitar case, you could go up into black areas, it was like a passport, no one would bother you. But then the racial thing got serious, unfortunately, and got dangerously sad. Next question.
Did you ever face any backlash from other white people for kind of taking the side of black people in such a segregated city?
I think a minute. Yeah, I guess there were some attitudes. But a lot of my black friends in the Army, on basic training, we got our first leave, and we went to Austin. And my two black buddies said, you don't want to go with us. They won't be allowed in the black clubs, jazz club. And I said, I don't care. I'm going to go with you. So we went, and the guys got in, and we had our uniforms on, of course. And the guy at the door looked at me, and he said, okay, but you got to sit in the back. So, yeah, I mean, there were attitudes. Unfortunately. And there still are today, unfortunately. People. But as I said, nobody asks you what color you want it to be. I always say, I'm black too, but that's on the inside, But a lot of my influences were from black musicians. That black organ player, Paul Bryant, gave me a lot of insight. The conductor for the Fifth Dimension, Rene DeKnight, who was a black gentleman that was with the Delta Rhythm Boys, and they lived in Paris because of the racial scene in America. And I was going through a bad marriage, and I came in one night for the show, and I was down. And I played the show. He says, what's the matter? I said, I got problems. He says, don't ever bring that on stage. He said, you leave that stuff out there. When you come on stage, you hit it. So, you can't bring your personal problems on the job. So I learned a lot from black musicians, and I have a lot of wonderful black friends and that I met in the service, and I cherish,
In your pre-interview, you mentioned Father Grappi, who was kind of like the
Well, I was
white face of the black
gone at the
community.
time. I was in the Army at the time, but I heard about it when I came home on furlough. That he came across the Viaduct with the black people, and then the people were waiting with him with chains and all that. Many years ago, I answered an ad in the jazz magazine, and it was for this pick, and the name of the company is called Strum and Comfort. And I have a gangline cyst and carpal tunnel in my right hand, and I have no feeling in it. I can't reach in my pocket and feel change. So I answered the ad, and the fellow was impressed. He went to my website, which is dickeliot.com, 1L, 1T. And he said, would you endorse my product? I said, sure. So if it wasn't for Greg and that wonderful pick from Strum and Comfort, I wouldn't be playing. And I've been using this for the past decade.
Very cool.
Yeah, and so. The first two tunes I play every night on my performances is one called El Shaddai. El Shaddai, Adonai, was the name in the Old Testament that the Hebrews gave to God. Adonai, El Shaddai, Adonai, the same today as yesterday. Amy Grant had a great hit on it. So that's the one I always play, and then What a Friend We Have in Jesus. So I'll play a little bit of each. The other one, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Take it to the Lord in prayer. So I play those two songs every night, the very first of all my performances, whether they liked it or not.
Very cool.
But this is a tune written by Howard Roberts called Hold It. I don't know what the EQ is like, but you'll be able to fix that?
Yeah, definitely. And then do you mind if we ask you one last question?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes, the last question that we had was, how does Milwaukee today compare to Milwaukee when you grew up here, and then any other time you spent here? What are the biggest differences from then and now?
Traffic, loud cars with boom boxes. People aren't as friendly. I mean, you can be, but you got to be careful who you say hello to. If they're too friendly, it might be a stick up, Traffic, but it's still Milwaukee. It's my hometown. Al Jarreau was a great black singer. I think he's still alive. And he wrote a song called My Hometown, Milwaukee. So my roots are here. I used to travel a lot. I don't travel anymore. I'm going to be 89 times around the sun, and it's getting a little difficult for me, and I retired from playing out, but I have students that come, and I'm blessed to be working with Luke, who I said has a phenomenal future ahead of him. I know the Lord has something special. And it's for you fellows as well, or whomever is watching this video. In your career, in your aspirations and dreams, always put it up to the Lord, because He has something special for you. And ask for guidance and direction. And that's about it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the privilege, fellas.
Of course.